If I limit the understanding of objectives with the present question of personality, remember, apart from describing your personality, these adjectives that you use in your answer, they tend to denote much more or much less. You can't precisely define it. Because of which, one may, by looking at your answer, abandon the attempt to yield any specific perspective from your answer. Hence, I always tell you, if I again limit my expression only towards personality and attitude, rather than having these adjectives, tend to use more and more personality descriptive verbs. Verbs and nouns are more precise. They significantly keep themselves very limited. Again, if I apply this to attitude or personality, in terms of these attitudes and personality. Second, you must always remember that whenever you express your attitude, for example, you must keep certain personality traits out of domain of these attitudinal prepositions that you are making. For example, let me assume that someone is fat. When you make this questionnaire, or when you make an attempt towards achieving the objectivity of these interpersonal characteristics, in no way your body fat is going to affect it. That means all these bodily characteristics that you have at the personal level do not have any effect at all on such objectivity. That means apart from taking immense care with respect to the language that you are using, you must also take care of what are those things which have to be kept exclusionary from these attempts to make the interpersonal characteristics objective. So in terms of linear approach, there are some limitations. In terms of even the vertical approach, there are some other limitations. Second, you work in an environment of hierarchy. In this hierarchy, we express a social relationship which can be conveniently defined as subordination. Someone is boss, someone else is a subordinate. This is the kind of social relationship that you have within an organizational setup. When you again try to achieve the objectivity, and if I keep solely my focus on objectivity, these types of social relationships must be exclusionary again. Otherwise, whatever those 5 broad dimensions that I was pointing out will become very much unscientific. They'll be biased. Once you are biased, it's not agreeable. It tells me that you are not open. And because of this bias, even though you are an introvert, you might become an extrovert. In any kind of social relation where such possibility is there, that must be kept out. There are two other things. By saying so, we are saying that we must look for what is called as neutral content. That is what our attempt must be. So the language of personality, the content and evaluation, all these three that we have to make as part of attitude, or for that matter even personality, this is what we have to try. If you look at these 5 broad dimensions, whether it is about the extraversion or introversion factor, or it is about the emotional stability versus neuroticism as a factor, these broad ranges or extremities within which your personality must lie with respect to a particular attitude that you are referring to, it in fact, in simplistic terms, give you what is called as temperamental aspect, right? Or it might give you what is called as stylistic aspect. Secondly, you have these two broad dimensions of personality, that is agreeableness and conscientiousness. You see that both in a way are related to what is called as acceptability. Here, this acceptability is all about what? Your character, which make the possibility of achieving objectivity much more, which enable it. So apart from these two broad dimensions which give you what is called as temperamental aspect of a particular personality, the other two are giving you the character of that personality in objective sense. There is third thing which is very important. That is all about openness. Sometimes we use few expressions which appear very much metaphorical in nature. I think you know what this being metaphorical is. You are trying to be symbolic. You are trying to draw some analogy. When I was discussing having Ashoka's wheel rather than Cherka in our flag, we were trying to be very much emblematic. All these come under what is called as metaphorical nature. This metaphorical nature, in a way, has to do with what? Your intellect. You are thinking something and you are trying to interrelate because you don't have any specificity with regard to what you want to express. You are trying to draw an analogy. This analogy, according to you, might express what you want to really express, or might enable you to make the opposite person understand more clearly what you want to express. But the fact of the matter is whether this analogy contains truth value to the highest degree or not. That means unless and until you have such an openness towards the object or the action which has to be spelled out with utmost clarity, you can't do it in an effective manner. This fifth factor, openness, is related to your intellect. Second, this fifth factor called openness, as I was expressing yesterday, also has to do with the broad range of interests that you might have, because of which you become very curious about these interests. And this curiosity will earn you a lot of eagerness. And this eagerness make you tend towards more creativity. This eagerness make you more and more tend towards rather being very much adventurous. Because of all these various attitudinal elements, what you would do is this multidimensional influence, because of openness, or openness as a dimension of all these multitudinal attitudes, you tend to learn more. You tend to relish new experiences more and more, which is expressed in terms of what is called as erudition. So apart from intellect, erudition is also one of the very fundamental requirements or very fundamental aspect that gets invariably included, denoting your intelligence, capabilities, talents, etc. So broadly, all these 5 dimensions have to do with your temperamental character or temperamental nature, your character, and your intellect or erudition. Erudition means showing your great capabilities to learn more, to gain more knowledge, and at the same time exhibiting whatever the knowledge that you have or whatever that you have already learned. I was telling you that the first 2 aspects of or dimensions of broad dimensions of your personality give you what is called as temperament or stylistic factor. The next two broad dimensions give you the character, and the third dimension, the fifth broad dimension of your personality would tell you about the intellect and the erudition, or whatever the likely factors that you have. And I was telling you that in spite of much of the effort in order to receive objectivity with regard to either your actions or with regard to your judgment or with regard to your conclusion, the first two factors called temperamental character or temperamental aspect or the aspect of character will still have some level of skepticism because of their nature of being very subjective. Even though you attempt to make them very much independent of such subjectivity, as I told you, credibility will still be in some level of questioning. Hence, it is the fifth dimension which make the credibility possible in all these four broad dimensions of a particular personality. This is what I said, because this has a lot to do with whatever the social effect that you want to achieve. However, I said that one is always plagued with a lot of intellectual inferiority. Where from it emanates? Whatever you do, you can't learn everything. Whatever you know is only a minute of whatever you have to learn. This is where human effort in order to receive credibility must remain very specific to one or the other field, such that you receive a lot of credibility in what you are saying, such that when you judge something, one would expressly think that it was perfectly comprehensible. It was well informed rather than ill informed. See how we have shifted our emphasis from being very narrow in terms of personality to very broad in terms of personality with its applicability towards attitude. And this shift was clearly on the basis of objectivity. And if you observe, they are ethically relevant, psychologically relevant, politically relevant, and socially relevant. And in a sense, if you attempt, they are measurable to a highest degree. And as I tell you, in order to properly assess personality, we find that intelligence becomes more and more indispensable. So your typical behavioral characteristics or the maximal or minimal nature of performance that you have with some or the other target or aim or goal that you have set at the personal level or at the social level. You find that all these 5 broad dimensions showcase a lot of reasonableness. There is this question now, does bureaucrats feel intellectual inferiority since they are generalists? How they tackle being top in vertical approach? If you look at the constitution, these bureaucrats have been given a lot of protection with respect to their actions. Second, as I always tell you, it works on the principle of domination of knowledge. That means, in spite of lack of such knowledge, given the protection which is available for the entire hierarchy, and because of which the decision making authority that you carry at the topmost level it is a way in which you handle such intellectual inferiority, number 1. Number 2, you must distinguish between particularly what is called as personality from what is called as your ability. There are sizable differences in these two. If you look at intelligence, as I tell you, intelligence has become indispensable in assessing the personality, right? Intelligence has to do with both the personality and the ability. That means, within the aspects of this personality, we are trying to be very much objective about this ability. So, as much learning as you make, you reflect your ability in spite of lot of variance that you might show with respect to personality. I was mentioning about this personality named Naresh Chandra. Naresh Chandra was a bureaucrat. He has nothing to do with nuclear physics. Yet, he has been chosen for the function that he has to perform, to retain it as a secret operation. Secret even to the level of the topmost authority, which is the office of Prime Minister. And he has ensured this with utmost ability. This third point is by virtue of his ability to interpret whatever he encounters in terms of situation or circumstance or person or whatever it is. Out of sheer experience that he gains, such that whatever may be the deficiency that he would carry, that deficiency is replaced and this deficiency will not be repeated in his approach. So as a consequence of this, whatever the problem that he encounters, that problem will be dissected and he would reconstruct it in a more scientific paradigm. The openness towards such experience is also another factor which make him to scale towards such topmost office. Fourth, because of all these, he substantially passes what is called as test of comprehensibility. His ideas would be hence comprehensive than you. You do not have that much of experience. You haven't yet learned how, even though you are exposed to newer and abstract problems, how to make them scientific by dissecting them, even though they are very much social in their nature, rather than being pure science. He'll conceive with lot of empiricism in his thought, and hence whatever that might lack in this abstract problem, he will attach all those corrections which are required. This is where his decision making ability will emerge more and more perfect. And this is what makes his decision making ability an expanded one. If you look at either cabinet secretary or principal secretary in PMO, they deal with almost everything. Why do you think we use this expression principal before secretary? They would know all those principal components of a particular abstract problem. That's it. And because of which they maximize the objectivity, because of which they will have logical sequence, and because of this they will also try to predict the logical consequences when they perform their actions. So whatever they think and whatever the way in which they act, if I bring in even this linear approach, there will be a lot of inconsistency, there will be a lot of internal consistency. Hence they would operationalize these with utmost effectiveness. This is where they could achieve optimization, you see. So fundamentally, whatever that would appear arbitrary, and in many extreme cases, this would be much more, assigning it lot of abstractness. Fundamentally, you will never see any bureaucrat at the topmost level discarding it as an item or a matter which need not be given the attention just because it is so abstract. They take it as it comes. What bureaucrat would actually do is they bring a lot of perfection and consolidation to whatever that is imperfect and inconsolidated. As I tell you, this has to do with both the evolutionary aspect and cultural aspect. So in the sense of attitude, throughout history, we have faced such imperfection, and given the social context through culture, it is ridden with such imperfection. So, a bureaucrat, that too at the topmost level, his sheer experience, he would also learn how this imperfection must be brought perfection. However, the training modules, I always refer to training modules because these training modules are so deficient, still ridden with lot of colonial culture, never addressing this ingenuity that we have in these modules. All these 5 broad dimensions that I was mentioning, all these 5 broad dimensions at the personal level they are interlinked with each other in a linear way, continuum. And it is observed in variance. In this linear combination of all these 5 broad dimensions, whenever you have the maximum variance, which is what we observe in most number of personalities, the tendency towards hypothesizing, expressing opinion will be more. If we don't achieve the objectivity with our sheer effort to improve our intelligence by focusing on what is called as openness, this variance will get maximized and it will remain residual in your attitude and hence personality forever. This complacency is also visible in the training module where you stop learning. Principally, learning as a process will get stopped. When I was telling you yesterday that the entire strategic community in its entirety was taking this nationalist approach in arriving at conclusions over China rather than broadening its scope such that the conclusion that they are making is really strategic in its content, structure, scope and appearance. I was referring to this fact. I remember in 2014, Prime Minister Modi criticizing expansionism of China. Then immediately he went ahead with his own affection that he has towards China. And we have seen how it has been given new mechanisms and means rather to postpone the persistent problems that we are having each other. And ultimately after these 6 years, he has completed circle and come back with the same statement again. Where from this problem emanates? This problem emanates because still you are making your decisions out of a narrow knowledge that you have gained from this strategic community. In the early 1970s, post-Arab war, there were many incidents of violence through so-called terror activities posed against Israel. One of those incidents which has remained in the annals of history was an attack on these Israeli sports persons who were about to participate in the Munich Olympics. We know that Olympics is a symbol of what? Peace. It's a symbol of joy. However, there was bloodbath. At the instance of this incident, and immediately the action that has been taken by Israeli intelligence named Mossad, then Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir issued a statement. It says, from the blood-drenched history of the Jewish nation, we learn that violence which begins with the murder of Jews ends with the spread of violence and danger to all people in all nations. Prime Minister continues saying that we have no choice but to strike at these terrorist organizations wherever we can reach them. That is our obligation to ourselves and also to peace. This is what Prime Minister of Israel says. We know that the Jewish history was filled with blood. There is no denial of that fact. But rather than looking at the basic reason why that has occurred, she has made it so subjective now. It's not just about Jewish people. It is about every religion, meaning religion itself. When it gets attached with abominably the dominant sections of the society, when it creates these classes in the society, the one which is dominant and the other which has to subjugate itself to such a dominance, this tension persists. And at the same time, as they are undisputedly about the belief, and as you know, it is completely unscientific, because we never subject these beliefs to any kind of scientific scrutiny or reason, as early part of Western philosophy was clear with it, because all these religious beliefs would always advocate you to follow some kind of what is called as karma. Your entire intellect will get subjugated to such acts, ceremonies. This is where you become completely subjugated to one system of belief. You systematize it, knowingly or unknowingly. Where from intellect functions then? Under such conditions of absence of intellect and this entire conditioning that these religions make, You would lose your fifth dimension, and these four dimensions will get narrowed down. Blood-drenched history of Jewish nation. The concept of nation at all was not there. No one knew what a nation is. This is how, if you really don't maintain the internal consistency in your training and in your emergence as a personality to serve the public interest, what we finally see is the stringent applicability of your inept, indefensible character traits. There is one more we observe in general with all these bureaucrats and also the various processes that they would go through. Again, here I take the example of training. Apart from training, there are many processes that they would go through, which have to make them very much resilient, which have to make them very much controlled, and which have to make them very much capable. Apart from this assessment at the personal level in the training, we also see what is called as the cluster analysis of persons. This is where you say that I belong to so and so batch. She belongs to so and so batch. Cluster. And there are certain stories which are there from either LBS NNE or from NPA. For that matter, any training institute. So and so batch has won so and so medals. So and so batch have always got their first rank. So and so room has always been filled with a meritorious candidate. They build these stories. This cluster analysis, apart from the person-centered approach that these training modules adopt, completely make these bureaucrats irrelevant. Anyhow, we have to fight and win this time in this competition. And they start showing their tendencies towards corrupting themselves. This has been proved empirically. I am not saying this. Various police commissions have said this. They are lying at the dark rooms. You are blocking the personality. You are making them to be visible in terms of certain blocks. Whatever the relativeness that we tend to see with respect to what is called as opposition, which remains vague in its character, would become centered now. It becomes the paradigm because of the stories that you have built and because of the cluster-based approach that you have adopted. What is the purpose of this cluster-based approach? This cluster-based approach, on the basis of thorough analysis of these persons, must bring in together those persons who have similar variability or a particular variability with regard to a particular broad dimension of personality. It's a variable centered paradigm. And by adopting this cluster based approach at one single shot, you will try to address this problem of variability or problem of imperfection that we see, which appear to be similar amongst all these persons. Hence you adopt this cluster based approach. But at the end, rather than realizing this cluster based approach relatively both at the personal level and also at this cluster level, make it a new paradigm in which this variance is much more and the range has increased. And this becomes the principal component. And just because of this, rather than being open to learning, you become orthodox. Cluster is leading to orthodoxy. You are being now typographed. You are so and so type. This is how you will be branded. You will be conveniently fitted into a particular kind of matrix. So the point is very simple. Whatever the methodological play that you must show with all these types which have to be appropriate is becoming improper, and because of this you emerge imperfect, and hence you don't have any seriousness to answer these abstract problems. You will find your own again the legacy with which we are suffering from, the colonial legacy. Running is for combing. That's it. This orthodoxy will never end. And this argument would be continued further, because he would be again coming as the director in the same training center, and he would continue with this. He would teach the same. What for is this running? In order to ensure that you fight the combat situation in an appropriate manner. This is what he would be ending it. So in this scale of most applicable to least applicable, he will always remain with this least applicable category. And this indistinguishableness will continue with every batch. So standardization has been very much vague. So apart from what ideally has to happen that I was telling you earlier, because of which this lack of knowledge as a problem would be addressed, also has simultaneously with it This problem of keeping yourself imperfect to the reality. This is where hierarchy would persist and exist continuously. No one is there to question you. So out of sheer experience, whatever you learn, that would become more intelligent than what you learn in your training session. So there is lot of deviation and there is lot of variation with whatever that you carry as knowledge and whatever that your boss would carry as knowledge, and because of this lot of variation, you would always be succumbing to what your boss says. So apart from this principle that you must adhere to the hierarchy, you encounter even these problems. All adulterated traits are getting inculcated in these training modules. I am trying to be a bit harsh here, but this is what the implication is after the thorough examination of all these issues, not by me but by the police commission. They show clearly these and the clear rationale to reform all these. Why did we have so many police commissions which we don't see with any other arena of your bureaucracy? Number of police commissions and number of reforms. At least they were trying to give it a kind of incremental validity, if not absolute. Objection as a principle has been adopted by these police commissions. Because we must also remember that all these bureaucrats at an ideological paradigm must understand that there is a generalized expectation that people have, which is relevant in terms of their life, that we are pointing out in terms of evolution and also in terms of culture. They want to exist here. They want to enhance their life. So the incremental validity with which you have to now move upon and achieve, it is not only about your own career and your own growth within this entire hierarchical ladder, it is also about the growing sense of people towards their life, the growing sense of people towards their quality of life. This is where ideologically the current situation remains very much incompatible to the reality, which has to be made compatible. The entire analysis that we did just now, of course because of the specific question, is relevant for your exam. Whatever that variance that we see with regard to all these 5 dimensions of personality must not remain as residual and must not become a successive residual for generations together, which would lead to the diminishing returns. Society and the ethical objective that we had with regard to society, that it must live in collection and it must live in collection with what is called as peaceful coexistence, in harmony, will get diminishing returns. This is where, to address all those deficiencies, we chose this broad dimensions paradigm to explain various attitudes, to understand various attitudes in this intersubjective concept, to give it a lot of objectivity such that you ignore and to reduce, if not ignore, considerably human element in the subjective sense, such that whoever is at the receiving end of a particular communication, be it your judgment or be it your conclusion or be it your any such attitudinal preposition that you are making, which remains to be the flag bearer of truth, would be considered as truth. This is where, by resorting to that fifth dimension, arguably you try to reduce the deficiencies and hence there will be a lot of predictability in the decisions that you make. In order to achieve all these, we have tried to make these taxonomies. It's a taxonomical approach through which we have categorized these broad dimensions of attitudes. And as you know, they lie at variance, and because of your openness, you will receive the acceptability by way of integrating all these 5 dimensions. Because of which you also achieve integrity in, or act of integrating the contradictory demands that you would see in the society. And whatever the communication that you give, and those who are at the receiving end, would definitely have this trait of simplicity. Even the illiterate will be able to understand that. In order to also achieve this, your communication will have a lot of empirical reality and its coverage. This is how, in practice, as a bureaucrat, you must ensure that those variable structures that you see with respect to so many abstract problems or abstract issues which are social in nature that you encounter, which are overwhelmingly complex, would be made simple, and hence it can become the basis for the decisions that you make. We must remember that being social is a hallmark of social functioning, human functioning, It is the single reason which has caused our survival. It is the single reason which has ensured the successful presence of this particular race. It is the single reason which ensured the coordinated action, even though it is interdependent. However, at the same time, it is the same coordinated action which also created the conditions of harshness, the conditions of precariousness, the conditions which are problematic, the conditions which would ensure our own mass extinction. Even though we know that human beings continue to be utterly dependent on one another for their survival and their well-being, we also know that it is the same dependency which has its own prejudices. And if you observe, whatever the decision that you make, or whatever the act that you perform, or whatever the thought that you get into your mind, or whatever the situation that you yourself get exposed to, we can clearly see that it is shaped by this demand of group living, the demand of society. If you want to eat, society has an influence. If you want to sleep, the society has an influence. Don't sleep in this direction. Don't eat in this particular position. That means crucially, your cognitive tendency and your motivational tendency towards a particular object, towards a particular situation, towards a particular person, everything is probably shaped by these demands of collective living, group living. Our capacities for reasoning, our capacities for higher functions, our capacities for acting independently, however, show their very existence to the constraints which are imposed by this fact called social living on our survival. Even our reproductive enhancement is determined by the society. ఈ ముహూర్తంలో పెళ్లి జరగాల, ఈ పూజ చేస్తే వీళ్ళు పుడతారు, ఆ పూజ చేస్తే అట్లా జరుగుతుంది. So our most fundamental concerns, which in fact must remain with our ability to understand our characteristics, motivations and intentions, rather than remaining itself within its own internalities, our fundamental concerns rather depend more crucially on our ability to understand the characteristics, motivations and intentions of others. నేను ఇట్లా చేస్తే వాళ్ళు ఏమనుకుంటారు, We talk of this strategic arms race which is ever increasing between various nations under the principle that holding these arms increases deterrence and hence the peace can prevail. Under this illicit principle, we are seeing an ever increasing defense budgets. This entire aspect of sociality as a hallmark of human functioning is taking, interestingly, all these illicit paths. Our mental capacity, our abilities to represent as perfect examples of such coordinated functioning is being manipulated at our own internal levels, keeping in view the same hallmark. So this capacity to understand the minds of others has become so central in our successful functioning. And in fact, it has become so central that if you compromise with it, the consequences that you would face is very devastating. Thap panchayats have to be looked at from this perspective. The recent encounter must be looked at from this perspective. Naxals' ambushes on CRPF Jawans or CRPF's combing operations have to be looked at from this perspective. It has gained its central importance, however, in its most rudimentary sense. Civilization tells us that we have become so forward, but at the same time, our practices tell us we have remained much more rudimentary than what our ancestors have remained with. You look at the enormity of the reform that you are trying to look at, you are trying to achieve. This syllabus won't be sufficient for that. In its own sense, it is so magnificent. Looking at the enormity of the consequences. But however, looking at the simplicity of this hallmark called coordinated functioning as a virtue of society, rather than it has to remain very simple, has been made so complex by the same human beings. This is the piteous thing that you see. So whatever the five broad dimensions that we were trying to analyze and understand to give it a lot of objectivity is to understand these social situations, and possibly as a bureaucrat you would mediate in these behavioral reactions that you would see amidst such social situations in such a way that ultimately this ethical objective called peace and harmony is remaining within the society. When they take their causal role in excruciatingly bringing out some or the other behavior at the individual level or at the group level by these persons, this enables at its core that you can operate on these issues with all those processes that we try to understand and make them into this, what is called as taxonomic aspect of your personality or interpersonal objectivity. You get at the specification of the nature of these social situations by applying all these. So whatever that you have garnered through your evolution in terms of all these experiences that you have in such a social environment, whatever you have representations that you have constructed on the basis of such current or previous experiences that you have, and whatever the influences that other aspects of attention and cognitions that you have as part of your cultural setting, and whatever the decisions, judgments, intentions and behaviors that you exhibit as a result from the application of all these processes in its entirety, they give you a reflection of the tensions that you see, that you can conveniently understand in these social situations. You might give it various names. For example, in certain situations, such as you are trying to get the permission of the government to initiate your startup, we know that the likes of Telangana government or Maharashtra government or Andhra Pradesh government or Gujarat government, they have automated this entire process. That means humans here are acting as through their rational analysis and active reasoning, which has guided their behavior, as an automatic process in shaping such social conduct. We could hence address the pervasive irrationality that would be there in giving and in accepting whatever the idea that you want to implement as part of your own very existence and as part of your effort to enhance your existence. This is how it helps you. Second, in these social situations, we also use this expression called tactical. So whatever the active thought that you have and whatever the systematic analysis that you have done of whatever the relevant information that you have, given the inherent limitations of these social situations and given the openness that you have towards such social situations which tend to lead you towards having knowledge oriented motivation, which is called as epistemic motivation, you emerge quite strategic in your allotment of your mental resources, that is your cognitive resources, such that you confront these social absurdness in these situations. You are acting as a tactician here. You become relatively more analytical rather than remaining very superficial in your analysis, and hence your judgment is going to be, your conclusion is going to be objective with a higher degree. Third, in these social situations, sometimes you may act with a lot of intuition. Intuition here, as a medium, can be replicated in our social understanding and in our various roles that we have in the social system, such as doctors or engineers or lawyers or actors, whatever it is, that can be replicated in the form of a lawyer. If you observe, the lawyer, through his sheer ability to seek truth, through their sheer ability to seek objectivity in the social environment, they act as if they are scientists with their questions. And most of these questions are intuitive in their nature. And they bring out abundant aspects of these social situations. That means this intuition as an aspect will make you know the world much better. But at the same time, you must remember that lawyers in general, in their role, would also manipulate truth. So the available facts can also be conveniently manipulated such that it can be flattered to a more preferred conclusion. Second, it is the same intuition which might also bring in a lot of bias, partiality in their judgments, impressions or choices, whatever that you call, conclusions, whatever it is. So you must be careful about this intuition, even though we know that it is this which brings out your sheer scientific temperament as a truth seeker, as a seeker of objectivity. This is the third aspect. The fourth aspect is, as part of attitudinal content, we understood what is called as affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, affect. Because you live in a particular social condition, and this we know fundamentally that we are hallmark of such human functioning in collection. Because we have to act in a coordinated manner, or most of the occasions a cooperative manner, all these tend to reflect our desire to achieve what is called as a particular affect. We act as affect-driven agents. So there is little room which is left for your mood, your feelings, your emotions in the real life context, even though this would be carried in the social situations that you encounter. So all social thought and all social action in every social situation would carry all these. This is where there is so much of abstractness. However, being a bureaucrat, as an affect-driven agent, you must be free from this world of emotion, world of mood and world of feelings, which are the states that you would also carry as part of your personality. And this is where those four broad dimensions of your personality must get themselves in tune with the fifth dimension of personality, such that you emerge as a rational actor rather than remaining as cumulative personality from your history. There would be many stereotypes. There would be many prejudices. And in association with these, given the social situations, they would become very much structural. And whatever the attitudinal object through your propositions that you are proposing, in its evaluative sense, even though appearing to be logical, it would be very much illogical in its conclusion. Hence, the judgment that you pass would become very much irrelevant. And hence, whatever the activism that you have to show towards associating these social situations towards social realities will lead to lot of disassociation. The activism, because of such illicit evaluation, becomes inconsistent. It becomes biased. It will have a lot of subjective meaning. And whatever the perceived behavior that you are expecting, in tune with your biases. And because of this, what will happen? Majority of the section of the society, because of one or the other discriminatory or prejudicial nature that you are also carrying with yourself being in the bureaucracy, you will not become sufficiently accessible. That means at the point of access itself, people start suffering. Because you remain very stereotypical. You remain associated with a particular social group that you are trying to represent. A particular social group whose interests are being served. And you are also characterized with all those bureaucratic characteristics that we already know, which have been pointed out by numerous committees and commissions. They are slow, they are forgetful, they are inaccessible, they are filled with red tapeism, corruption, hostility, whatnot. That means bureaucracy is getting attached with all these stereotypes which are being shown as culture of bureaucracy. And consciously, even the ordinary persons are carrying all these impressions. And it has become culturally ingrained in the belief system of the people. Either you will be called as Babu, or you will be forgotten as the one which is always unresponsive. So consciously, ordinary people are endorsing these beliefs as culture of the bureaucracy. Once you get your results, and once you see that Gautam has got first rank, Maitri has got first rank, or Deepak has got first rank, out of sheer general expectancy that the people have, they start branding you. saying that you are smart, saying that you are an intelligent, you are real intellectual, saying that you are well educated. So many adjectives start getting attached to your first rank. Because of that first rank, you will attain these privileges in the society. Then how come when you are part of this bureaucracy, you are getting branded with these cultural traits? Even though you are so attached with these adjectives by the same ordinary citizens, where you are found very consistent, very relevant, suddenly you become so inconsistent and irrelevant being part of such a bureaucracy. Expectancy. You are unable to meet the expectations of the ordinary people. Democracy is all about these expectancies. Hence we always talk about opposition to the state as the hallmark of democracy. Your behavior must encounter this opposition such that these inconsistencies, this irrelevance is addressed. There must not be any confusion here. This automatic approval route has been adopted by the politics of the day because of the same problem. Either implicitly or explicitly, you are irresponsive, you are unconscious of one's understanding, idea. And in fact, it also tells us that the possibility of you remaining conscious to this reality, you becoming effortful to this reality, having these controlled processes, diligently remaining oriented towards the due process that you have to follow, have not been adhered to. It's a slap on bureaucracy, in fact. So it is compelling, and it is also very much influential for you to remain aware to this reality. Your intention must hence get enhanced. You become efficient. You would also see the situations where there is involvement of controlled processes, again through same bureaucracy. You exercise those controls and you reduce this control and you increase this control depending upon the social situations. You look at the import of onions and then suddenly subjecting into a lot of import controls, and at some other times you will be importing them heavily. Even the current economic survey deals with it extensively, saying that in order to ensure wealth creation in the economy, how these very small aspects would act as deterrent towards such wealth creation. Limiting ourselves to see this single idea, if I analyze this situation, you are exercising this controlled behavior to be achieved in that particular social situation. you apply these controlled processes. Here again, you must remember that you have all the relevant information with respect to that social situation. And whatever the limitations that you have with regard to the attention that you have to pay based upon whatever the 5 broad dimensions of attitude that I was discussing, and whatever the relevant efficiency that you have to show with regard to resources and their nature of limits, you must remember that there are many constraints which are attached. So this entire process of controlled processing has 2 outcomes. It might be either because of your own limitations being part of bureaucracy, or the limitations of bureaucracy itself, we are unable to address this situation continuously. That's what the current economic survey tells us. Why do you want to regulate this scenario rather than leaving it to the demand and supply mechanism, which can more effectively regulate this situation? That means society has its own internal strength, internal ability to adjust and readjust to the evolving situation. This is what it says. And hence, it also calls for reforming this Essential Commodities Act, which is draconian according to it. It is draconian because it has been placed in the 9th schedule of the Constitution. And as you know, because it has been placed before the judgment of Keshavananda Bharati case, that is April 24th, 19. What is the date and what is the year? Those which have been included in this 9th schedule before this judgment will remain there within 9th schedule until you change the nature of the 9th schedule itself by way of constitutional amendment, but cannot be subjected to judicial review. Hence it was advocating amendment to this particular act. So your tendency to regulate this social situation is being criticized by the economic survey. And at the same time, you might also think that this regulation is very much required. There are certain situations where this regulation is required. Particularly, the situation that we are encountering in the border, particularly the situation that we are seeing in these northeastern states and also in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in the form of insurgency. Even though controlled processes are required, I am not suggesting here that these controlled processes must not take into account the realities in its entirety. These controlled processes must become efficient such that they become self-regulatory in their very social sense. They consciously pursue non-violence in place of violence. Success is being measured here in terms of the values towards which you are oriented. Whether you are oriented towards the ultimate objective of the society. And as we know, this ultimate objective flows from this hallmark of collective functioning, collective living. Peace and harmony have to be achieved. So the controlled process, even though is recommended here, that must take into account the enormity of various information. You should not intentionally suppress this information. You should not intentionally become oriented towards one or the other type of stereotype. It will lead to most ironic situations, most draconian situations. And this is what repeatedly being seen with respect to the environment, with respect to gender, with respect to the reality of caste, or any other such social situation. This is not visible. We tend to orient ourselves towards retribution rather than substantial justice. We don't stop at correction. We tend to find our satisfaction through retribution. So the processing capacity here in terms of such controlled processes is still very deficient. It needs judgmental correction. So our qualifications must emerge in such a way that this control process becomes very much democratic. In place of stereotype, you will replace it with relative efficiency. Those ambiguous social situations become unambiguous, and hence whatever the constraints that you put upon the behavior of your own subjects in the form of citizens are removed. You see how continuously there is so much of trait implications that you have in this entire understanding. There is so much of influence towards your own behavior and the social behavior, and your behavior towards social behavior, and the society's behavior towards you being a part of bureaucracy. So the correctional process must be set in.